Hello everyone, welcome back. In this lecture pod, I wanted to explore some of the implications around the telegraph. So what we'll be looking at is the telegraph's relationship to power, its relationship to business, and finally its relationship to news and language. So as a thought experiment, let's imagine being a message before the telegraph. How do you move? What might you say? And to whom might you go between? So when we think about the telegraph, this is a classic kind of image that comes into our mind. So Carey argues that the telegraph really represented the first time that communication was separated from transportation. So what that meant was that messages no longer had to go by foot, rail, or horseback. And this allowed the control of physical processes entirely. Let's think about that in terms of the rail. So what that meant with the telegraph, so before the telegraph, in order to work out if a train was running on time, you basically needed to see the train, right? And so the telegraph really enabled switching to take place so people outside of the people that were on the train could understand if it was running on time. So it really enabled a new focus on the speed in communications. And when we think about the speed of the message, it's incredibly important, even today. And when we think about that, think of how the 9/11 attacks and what happened with the fourth plane. So them being told that, well, they're not actually taking those planes away, they're actually crashing them. And so the people on the plane were actually able to deal with that. So when we think about power, so before the telegraph, where did power reside? And I think a really good example to think about is the British control of India. And so what the telegraph enabled was the control of colonies from the centre, so from Britain, rather than from the periphery. So the person in India who had control of it on behalf of Britain. So when you really think about how you exert control before the telegraph, where a message took 3 months to go from Britain around the Horn of Africa and up to India, then what would you actually say in that message, right? How would you actually deal with that? What are you likely to say? You can't give too many specific details, so it needs to be quite general. So I would imagine a message would be somewhat like, don't let the natives get too restless, send all the money over to us, don't screw it up. When we think about the telegraph and money, it had an enormous transformation on business. So what it enabled was really trade across space and trade across time. So at one level, before the telegraph, business tended to be very local, right? And you would always know the people that you were in business with. What the telegraph really enabled, in addition to the kind of rise of very large multinationals, was being able to trade with people who you didn't know personally. So it also enabled the rise of the middle class, and it really restructured a lot of elites. There were a lot of new structures of social relations, and what we had was really the emergence of a very commercial middle class. This new mode of production required a new body of law, economic theory, and political arrangements, management techniques, and organizational structures. Business relationships shifted from being personal to being interpersonal. And we could deal with people that we didn't know personally and were able to have a certain degree of anonymity. This and the increase of monopoly power was also normalized, right? So when we think about kind of businesses, we're quite accustomed and used to thinking about monopolies existing and huge corporations wielding enormous amounts of power. But on the internet, the wire doesn't matter so much. So I've given you a link to a video. I'm not going to play it now, but it's very important. So towards the end of it, he kind of brings up an image of where the really big routers are that connect up the internet. What's interesting about that, when you compare that to the image that I showed previously with the telegraph wires, they're basically in the same places. When we think about the telegraph and news, it really reworked written language and the nature of awareness itself. What we had in terms of news, we had a really big shift from the local to the national and the international. It was still quite expensive and to send and receive words via the telegraph. And so news was really stripped of the colloquial, the local, and the regional, and the language had to be really standardized. So there was this impact on kind of compression. So when you had a story and you were sending it to a different city, then you had to compress it, and then someone on the other side would kind of re-expand it. And from that point, the newsroom became much more like a factory. And when, we still kind of see that when we consider the sparseness of news reports from Reuters and Associated Press, right? We see very factual, very short kind of pieces. So just in summary, Carey identified two aspects of communication: control and the ritual, this maintenance of society and this maintenance of our shared beliefs. Meikle and Young stressed the importance of a third: circulation, of our interaction through these networks. So what does the Telegraph tell us? It tells us that history is very important, that technology can have profound cultural and economic impacts. And when we really think about it, is there a really huge difference between the internet and the telegraph, or is it mainly one of bandwidth? I think this is a question that you might like to explore more in your seminars. Thank you.